This is a continuation of a program that we did this morning in a slightly different form. This morning, the entire student body assembled in two places. This room was completely packed for a conversation among two former mayors of New Orleans and Mitch, three Jesuit alumni, while simultaneously elsewhere, Dr. McKenna, Dooky, Marc Morial, and a classmate of mine, Glenn Goodyear, talked about the events of 1962 for 8th graders, for pre-freshmen, and for freshmen. We reconvene in a slightly different form for you all tonight to continue the commemoration of this event at Jesuit. So far as I know, it's the most extensive conversation of its kind going on anywhere in town during this 50th anniversary year. I'd like to set a little context for you all about Jesuit High School in 1962. Some of you are old enough to remember. Most of you probably have no direct knowledge of it, although you adults are closer to those events, and you young people, in some ways, this seems like events from Mars, although in other ways it's perhaps all too familiar. Jesuit in 1962 was about 2/3 of the size that it is today. It was very much an all-male school. There were no women here on faculty at all. Very few women were visible in any way in the hallways or in the life of the school. Most of the students came from New Orleans. In 1962, the development of Jefferson Parish and St. Bernard was about to explode, but had not yet really detonated. The North Shore was still virtually empty. There were 2 or 3 students here from Laplace and the river parishes, but that's about it. The students who came here came from New Orleans, from the 9th Ward in Gentilly, and to a lesser extent from the West Bank. They arrived by bus. Most of them were old enough to have seen at one time or another the placards that segregated the front of the bus and the back of the bus for various passengers. And although the placards were gone by 1962, the legacy of that seating arrangement was still in effect, and you could still see its legacy. So here, let me, just for a moment. In 1962, I was a sophomore here. And the school dynamic then was much the same as all school dynamics are. The tone of the school is set by the culture that students bring from their dinner tables, their politics or their parents' politics. And what was safe to say and what was not safe to say was set from group to group by the personalities of the student leaders in each sort of unofficial cell. And the chemistry of the school at large was sort of a collective of all of those cells. Safe to say that the student body in 1962 fell along a continuum, although it was not evenly distributed along that continuum. At one end of the spectrum, there were students who were frankly racist and unashamed to say so. There was no penalty for saying so in the schoolyard. At the other end of the spectrum were a relative handful of students for whom racial equity was something whose time had come, and they were willing to say so, but they were not exactly shouting it from the rooftops. And then there were those people in the middle who were very conflicted. In 1962, the logic of the civil rights movement was beginning to penetrate, and there were white people who were beginning to struggle with their conscience and who were beginning to think that maybe this was an argument that had purchase. But in the abstract, and down here in the weeds in my life, well, maybe not here, maybe someplace else, maybe not this year, maybe next year. And that was kind of That was also in the mix. Finally, it's important to remember that in 1962, and those of you who are old enough obviously remember it, those of you who are quite young, it's very hard for me to describe the how high the cultural temperature was in New Orleans. Among white families, there was a sort of a continuing sense of anxiety, a sense that something that was old and permanent was passing away. Not really passing away, it was being pulled down. And among black families, there was a sense of determination and hope, a sense that forces were gathering that would soon change another way of life for the better. The civil rights movement was fully engaged in 1962. Remember that Dr. King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech is still a year away. The landmark civil rights bill that will outlaw racial discrimination across American life is 2 years away. And the Voting Rights Act, which will secure and enforce voting rights for African Americans, especially in southern states, is still 3 years away. So 1962, the battle is fully joined in New Orleans and elsewhere, and it's against that backdrop that the curtain rises here in New Orleans, not only for Jesuit High School, but for De La Salle and Dominican and Holy Cross, for everybody. And it was a moment. It was a moment memorable enough to call us together 50 years later to talk about what it meant. And my first question is for Moon, because Moon was a rookie legislator in Baton Rouge where massive resistance was organizing itself to shut this thing down. I'm talking now about 1960 and public school desegregation. But Moon was nearly alone in the legislature in pushing back. And Moon, I want you please to talk a little bit about those times in the legislature. And if you could, because I know that you were a liberal Democrat and you were a Catholic, you were a product of Jesuit education. What were your feelings and frustrations about the Catholic Church following the public schools by 2 years? How did that happen, and how did that make people like you feel?
Now, before I respond to that, which I will, I hope, before I end my brief remarks, I'd like to congratulate Matt for a beautiful power presentation. I thought it was extremely well done. The problem with that presentation, and he couldn't have done it any better, please understand, is that it, in a sense, leaves unanswered, not that anyone can answer it or describe it, but that is the context in which all of this happened. One point that was made was that the turning point was the Plessy versus Ferguson. And yes, that was an important point. There's no question about it. But our problem did not begin there. And I think this is what we have to bear in mind when we look at this issue. The problem began when we brought hundreds of thousands of people against their will to this country and enslaved them. That's when the problem began. We created the problem. And when slavery ended, the question was now, what are we going to do with these people? And even people who today are seen as great libertarians, and let us focus just a moment on President Lincoln. He even contemplated a return to Africa, because the problem was, what are we going to do? How are we going to treat these people now that they have their freedom and are forced into a culture that is unaccepting, looking at the entire South and many other areas? And so we are wrestling with this thing over many, many years. I've run into many people who would say, good God, it's over with, you know. And let me tell you, I felt the same thing. In 1954, when I was at Loyola University, and I'll use various terms tonight, they were respectful terms at the time, 2 colored guys entered Loyola University. One was Norman Francis, the other was Ben Johnson. I, by this time, had overcome all of the racial inherited things that I learned on the street as a child. I didn't say I was fully recovered, I was partially recovered. And I remember meeting Norman on the day that story broke in the newspaper, in the foyer of the house where the law school was at the time. And I said to Norman with great enthusiasm, thank God it's over. Well, let me tell you, that was 1954. It wasn't over. It was not even the beginning of being over. And even today, we deal with this issue, and it's one that has to be confronted honestly and legitimately by everyone. Everyone sees it in a slightly different perspective. There were movements in this country not for integration at one time, but for separation. There was movement of back to Africa. There was movements of separate colonies. There was a resistance to joining the majority white community. Now, the blame falls entirely on white society for racism and for the Jim Crow laws. Make no mistake about that. But the solution became far more complicated than was the creation of it. When I went to the legislature in 1960, I had been trained by the Jesuits here and trained by the Jesuits at Loyola University. Now, strangely enough, the enormous respect and love I have for the Jesuits, they were very divided as a university faculty as to whether or not they should integrate that university or not. Several attempts had been made before Norman Francis finally entered and Ben Johnson finally entered. And they entered, as they did here at Jesuit, without fanfare in 1952. And all we knew as students was that 2 colored kids entered. Now bear in mind, this is 1952. That is long before, 10 years before George Wallace and Ross Barnett were standing in the doorway of Mississippi and Alabama universities trying to prevent integration. So we're 10 years before them. And we're also 2 years before Brown versus Board of Education. Well, if I had any lingering thoughts about the difference between blacks and whites, the inferior nature of blacks, that was totally blown away by meeting Norman and Ben. They were smart, they were good looking, they were better dressed, they were better behaved, they were superb students, superb friends. And so it was only 6 years later that I found myself elected to the state legislature, facing the question of whether or not the state would abandon public education rather than integrated schools. Now bear in mind, the parochial system is not involved at this time. But the question was, if we're a church, why aren't we going to lead the public forum? Why will we be forced to follow the public system of the public laws? I know the Archbishop was a great man, and he did pronounce many times in 1950s, we're going to end segregation, segregation's ended the parishes. But that was very much like the Brown versus Board of Education decision. It was a pronouncement, but nothing happened. There was just a pronouncement. In the parish that I was in, I assure you, blacks sat in the back, and if there were not enough seats, they moved back further for the white parishioners. And this was after 1954. So we made these pronouncements, but we didn't move. Now, in looking back, and asking myself, well, what was prudent? What was the moral prudent thing to do? I have no reason to be critical. Full judgment was brought to bear, I'm satisfied, about the moral issues, about the financial issues, how fast do we go, how slow do we go. And so it was only until 1962 that the parochial schools finally integrated. I knew Ruby Bridges. I didn't know her at the time, but I was in Baton Rouge voting on this legislation, and I'm given more credit than I deserve. But years later, Ruby and I and Verna met at our house and had breakfast together, with her telling me what happened in her life and what the result was of the integration of that school, and what I was looking at in Baton Rouge. And we kind of put a half of a story together, each giving their point of view of what was happening at the time. There was extraordinarily bitter feelings in Baton Rouge, and the reason was, if Orleans can integrate its school system under this edict of the federal government, and that meant that Bossier Parish would have to do it, and Shreveport would have to do it, and St. Tammany would have to do it. So this became the battleground of that 1960 special session. And we went into special session after special session after special session, until finally every one of the resolutions and laws that we passed was struck down. So we came home and the schools were integrated. And I'm going to try to keep it short because I know each of these speakers has something important from their perspective to point out. One of the fascinating things that happened was that Wilson School, which is 2 blocks from my house and considered then to be a very fine public school, was all white. And in the face of what the school board was trying to do at the time, and that was they took a vote and the parents across the city said, close the schools. The Wilson Parents Club met, and it was basically a Catholic Jewish neighborhood in Broadmoor. And they took a vote and said, send us the kids, we will take them, which was running contrary to all of the anger that was out there at the time. Well, because of the pupil placement system that the court used to place Ruby Bridges and the other children, they placed them in neighborhoods, which was Francis and McDonough schools, theoretically on the idea that they were going to school with people who were economically essentially like they were, and not to uptown New Orleans where the wealthy could have absorbed it with little difficulty to themselves. But they unfortunately went into the neighborhoods where the racial tensions were the greatest. And the next year, more schools integrated. Wilson School, inside of, I would say, 15 years, became virtually all black, because every time the numbers rose, even those people who did not consider themselves racist and who were willing to accept a few black children did not want their children to be in essentially a black culture where any significant number of students became black. St. Matthias, which was the school where our children was going, 2 blocks further from our house than Wilson, essentially the same thing happened. My daughter Mary entered that school as an all-white school in 1960, I would say. And when the first children were introduced in 62, hooray, she was fine. When my last child graduated 11 years later, he was one of 2 whites in a class of 22, because the same thing was happening in this parochial school. Parents gradually began to move their children out. Not a pretty picture. And yes, I'm closing. It's not a pretty picture, but it's a picture that has to be kept in mind. And what Jesuit has done, I think, is to use the correct moral principles and discipline to do it in the correct way. Receiving criticism, yes, for not having done it earlier, but also looking at the result, one cannot but say that it's been enormously successful.
Dooky, you're the oldest of that first
Thank you,
wave.
Bruce.
No, yeah, you look it, man. You look great.
Thank you.
I mean, you look very. I wish I had that hair. You know?
A gentleman.
You're the eldest of the so-called pioneers. Why? What was the thinking in the Chase household that sent you to Jesuit, and what were you told to expect?
Well, my mother and father made the decision based upon information from Sister Anne Marie, who was a sister of the Blessed Sacrament nun who taught the 8th grade at Corpus Christi, that I would go to Jesuit High School, of course, being in the 7th Ward. I wanted to go to St. Augustine. I wanted to be a Purple Knight. But I think the nuns had collaborated with Archbishop Rummel. I know Drake DeGrange is a colleague of mine from that 8th grade Corpus Christi class. And I think they selected top students in the 8th grade class to come to Jesuit. They identified it. As a young person, that conversation we did not have. Our parents told us where we were going to go. At least mine did, and I'm sure with Drake having so many siblings, his parents probably told him where he was going to school too. But we all went here. We didn't know what to expect. But our parents trusted that the religious people would not guide their children into danger. And I think that was something significant. The people in the Corpus Christi Parish had a lot of faith in the pastor and in the nuns at Corpus Christi, that they would not put the children in danger. So we didn't feel that we were being endangered by coming here.
So when you were here, what was the social dynamic? I mean, what was the temperature in the schoolyard and in the cafeteria and in the locker rooms? What was just how did it feel?
Well, every person might have experienced something differently. I can only account what I experienced, and I experienced initially, the students thought we were somewhat like in the Bible you read about the lepers, how everybody wanted to, you walk up the stairwell, they would move to the side. No one would want to touch you for fear that something contaminated would rub off on them. And, you know, I could deal with that because, you know, it made it easier to walk up the stairs. The other thing is sometimes students would take it to another level. They would throw something down from the 3rd floor down when you were seated eating lunch. And my first tendency, along with other students, would be to run up there, but we thought, boy, that would be silly. By the time we run up 3 flights of stairs, we wouldn't see who did it anyway. Now, I didn't know that whether other students had issues that I didn't have, but the short answer is that we evolved as a Jesuit student body together. And we role modeled, and I've mentioned this before, after you, Bruce, and after people who were senior to us. And we tried to emulate to fit in. So if we thought the thing was to study, then we studied. If it were to be an athlete, then we wanted to be an athlete. We wanted to fit in, and we tried to fit in, and as a result, we began to have good friends here.
Dr. McKenna, incidentally, I think they mentioned to you, but I want to emphasize that Dr. McKenna flew down from his practice in Frederick, Maryland, to take part in this. So I think that's a great thing. For your essay, you wrote about this in a edition coming up of the J Notes, and you shared a little bit of story about how you selected Jesuit, which was sort of doubly unusual because of where specifically you grew up.
Yes.
Would you tell that story?
Well, I will try. Let's say, blessed are the brief, for they shall be invited back. So, that's Beatitudes, Father. You can quote me on that. I'll try. I was moved from Corpus Christi, which was the 7th Ward Black Creole school, 2 blocks away from Sacred Heart, which was the white church school on St. Bernard Avenue. And I was moved from 1st grade at Corpus Christi over to 2nd grade at St. Leo the Great. St. Leo being right off DeSay and near City Park, all-white neighborhood. And I was just told that I was going to a new school. I had no choice in that. I remember the first day of school, the nuns came out to stop us from playing this particular game that we were playing, and I thought it was a lot of fun. And it was a game of tag. But the game of tag actually was called, forgive me, was called nigger touch. And you touch me, okay, now you run around like boogeyman and anything else, but it was nigger touch. I didn't know that was a bad thing. I knew it was a bad thing, but I didn't know it was me. Because that was not used in my household. You know, it's different now. You know, that's now a much more term of endearment than it was when I grew up. That was very much a term of degradation. So I went along through St. Leo, and the smart guys in the school all talked about Jesuit. Pete Finney, Al St. Pierre, Rocky, Brian Beeler. The smart kids were going to Jesuit. And I'm in two worlds. I'm being called one set of names at home in the neighborhood, you with the white boys, you know, you an Oreo, you know, you this and this. And I'm getting called a different set of names in St. Leo. But I decided that I wanted to go to Jesuit because I thought Jesuit was the best school. Apologies to St. Aug because I lived across the street from St. Aug, not across the neutral ground. There was across the street, from here to there. And my front yard was their backyard. So every day I walked out and there was St. Augustine, which all my family had attended since it opened. My brother was in the first or second graduating class. But I decided to take the road less traveled, partly because I thought Jesuit was better, another because I didn't want to get paddled. This is true. I was 11 years old. I was going through this now. Said I don't have a lot of padding back there. And then it was the well, this is what I'm used to. I'm used to an integrated environment. I'm not intimidated by this. I'm not afraid of it. Well, some incidents happened. I almost didn't go. I almost went to St. Aug. My folks ran over there to get the thing from Father O'Rourke. I think it was Father O'Rourke was the president, I think, back then. And I decided, no, I'm going to stay and go to Jesuit. So I made the decision when I was 11, 12, and I made the decision to come to Jesuit on my own. No one forced me to it. My parents left me alone. To their credit, I'm sure they were very nervous. I'm sure there were lots of conversations that I'll never be privy to about how that happened, about how they felt about it. But since that time, many other McKennas have followed me. There are two here, and so I guess somebody had to be the first.
Yeah. Mark, you said earlier, you told the student body earlier that you came out of Christian Brothers. Mm-hmm. Christian Brothers functioned as kind of a pipeline for Jesuit, and you enrolled in. You enrolled when?
72.
72. All right. So integration is 10 years in the rearview mirror by the time you show up. And there had even been talk in your household of Newman as an option for you.
Right.
But you wanted to go to Jesuit because you thought it was a center of academic excellence. And, okay. Integration was 10 years. The community, the African American community, had 10 years of sort of market experience, looking at Holy Cross, De La Salle, Jesuit, the others. Was there in the African American community a kind of ranking in a sense that one school was more hospitable than another?
You know,
and where was Jesuit in that?
I was an athlete. Stephen was an athlete, and I came to Jesuit to play. I wanted to play football and basketball. I had played in the Nord program. I had played on their all-star teams. Holy Cross wanted me to come to Holy Cross. Brother Martin wanted me to come to Brother Martin. St. Augustine wanted me to come to St. Augustine. Everybody wanted me to come. I was a good student, but they wanted me to come to play ball. In those days, and this is important, from the perspective of the African American community in New Orleans, St. Aloysius and Brother Martin were fielding predominantly black basketball teams. And the image of the schools in the public sphere was that they were integrated. Holy Cross at that time was fielding an integrated predominantly black basketball team. So the image of Holy Cross in the public sphere was that it was an integrated school. When I got to Jesuit, only Rodney Turow and Blaine Lassane had played basketball on the varsity team before me. Stephen McKenna and Rodney Turow had played football. Jesuit did not have a public image because in those days, high school sports was really, really big. And it defined in the community the image of schools in many respects, the public image of schools. Jesuit didn't field integrated, didn't have many black athletes either playing basketball. When I played basketball, I was the only one on the basketball team the 3 years I played. When I played football, Stephen and I were there my sophomore year, his senior year, my junior year. I was the only African American on the football team. My senior year, there were 3 of us on the football team. So from a public consumption standpoint, the public saw Jesuit, the African American community saw Jesuit as being a school that was still substantially white, and Holy Cross and Brother Martin being much more integrated, although if you went behind the numbers, there probably wasn't a big difference in the student body. So image was defined by sports, and in those days, you know, Brother Martin had one great basketball team. Remember Rick Roby? And Holy Cross had one great basketball team. They won state championships. They competed. Brother Martin had a great football team and had an incredible rivalry with St. Augustine at the time and had many, many African-American players. It's that image, you know, I think was somewhat prevalent, whereas Jesuit's image was still probably an image of a predominantly white school, and probably was much later that it integrated. Now, you know, you can question the wisdom of Brother Martin and Holy Cross going after black athletes, you know, to win basketball games and what that meant, but it did affect, I think, the public image. And so I probably came here like Stephen on my own. I've always gone to integrated schools, went to St. Gabriel, went to Christian Brothers, and at Christian Brothers there were only 2 black students in the whole school. My brother came, he was the 3rd. And when I got to Jesuit, my point of view was that Jesuit was going to be a lot like Christian Brothers, where I had a great and positive experience. Like Stephen, I grew up in a little bit of a St. Augustine and like Dooky environment. I grew up in Pontchartrain Park. In Pontchartrain Park, the best academic students went to St. Aug and joined the St. Aug A-Track. The best athletes went to St. Augustine or they went to Brother Martin to play football or basketball, and that was the world I lived in. So I had to kind of get ribbed about why did you go to Jesuit? Why didn't you come over here with us to Brother Martin or Holy Cross? And here was my father who's saying, you know, you ought to consider Newman. They got a great basketball team, and you get into all the schools. And I said, no, I want to go to Jesuit because my friends from Christian Brothers were going to Jesuit, and because, candidly, Newman was 2A and Jesuit was 4A, and that made a big difference in those days.
So Dooky, I want to ask you, and then I want to come to you in a second. You mentioned the little sort of private indignities, and some of the guys who went, you know, the year before you and who were in that first wave, they suffered, we now know, more than the ordinary turmoil of being 16, which ain't nothing to sneeze at. You know, a high school environment can be a lethal place under the best of circumstances. But the guys who were here, the first African American guys who were here, we now know, you know, suffered a lot of sort of invisible cruelties and hidden indignities, and you've mentioned some of that. 10 years later, Mark got into a fist fight in the cafeteria, he explained this morning. We've heard a little bit about this in the presentation, but I wonder to hear from you, did you ever have the sense, implicitly or explicitly, that the faculty and the administration in some way had your back?
I felt that the faculty and the administration did have the students at the back of every student at Jesuit. I was impressed to see Father Stallworth in that film. I knew him as an English professor. He taught me English. But I was so proud of him Matt, to see all the things he tried to stand up for at Jesuit. I was also proud to see Archbishop Rummel and all the things he stood up for, because you didn't know who had your back. You were too young. You thought you had to fight your own fights, and you thought you were tough enough that no one had your back, you would still be able to survive. But there were a lot of people who had our backs here. I particularly remember the faculty very warmly here. I can't single out any faculty that did not have my back, whether it was music instructors or algebra teachers or English professors or teachers. I felt very comfortable here. I felt that the Jesuits, though, sometimes protected us a little bit. I think some of the students in our class could have played. Richard did run on the track team and was on the track team. I think others could have been on the basketball team or football team. I think Rodney Turo, because he looked like Jim Brown, made the football team, and the others of us didn't look like that, but I wanted to play baseball. I think one reason why I couldn't was because maybe the Jesuits were a little protective of who made the team back in '63 and '64. And just to put the record straight, because I know there's some '65 graduates, the state basketball championship teams here were just ideal. And we like athletes too, and I like to have been able to say, like these two Jesuit High graduates, that I played on some sports team, but I didn't. But everybody had our backs
I
here.
was going to say, and I think it's, I remember Father Harry Thompson with great fondness. Harry Thompson married my wife and I. We had a lifelong relationship. He did the invocation at my first inauguration as mayor. He was a counselor and an advisor to me, and was incredibly supportive and pushed the school. He hired the first African-American faculty members when I was here in the 1970s. He started an effort, and he utilized a number of the students to outreach back to Corpus Christi, back to St. Peter Claver. I remember going to St. Monica's in my uniform to go speak to 7th and 8th grade students to encourage them to attend Jesuit High. And he made, I think, and it was not always universally warmly received. His actions were not. But I think in my mind, he demonstrated a whole lot of courage in the 1970s to push the envelope just a little bit farther along the road, and I think he made a difference. In the number of African American students here increased from, I think when we were here, was probably 14 or 15 out of about 1,000 to maybe by the time I left, the number was closer to probably about 40 students or 45 students who were attending, because there were a couple of classes of probably 20 students that came in behind us. So, in terms of faculty having your back, I would say that. But I recall this since this morning, and I took a course in advanced public speaking, and I took Love Jesuit, had courses in Introduction to Public Speaking, Advanced Public Speaking. And we had to do a presentation. This was 1975, 1976. And I decided to do a presentation on apartheid, which was in the news at that time. So I did this presentation on apartheid. I used the Time Life books that were in my parents' library to prepare this paper. And I did the paper. I got up and made the presentation. And the professor, the teacher, at the time, called me up afterwards and said, "Where did you get your information from? I don't believe that any of it is true." He said, I said, "I use Time Life books in my parents' library." He said, "I need you to bring the books to school." And, I brought that book and a whole bunch of other books. I went and did some additional research, brought a big pile of books, and I remember looking through it. He looked through it, and he contemplated, and he said, I kind of feel like I was missing something, because I didn't know that there was any such thing as apartheid and that it existed in 1975. He said, "Oh, well," but then I got the award for the best student in the class. So it was a great memory. But I remember I felt challenged. I'm thinking, is he teasing me, or is he hazing me, or does he really not know? And you know, it was stunning to me that he said candidly, I didn't know. I guess I just haven't lived. I haven't been exposed enough.
You know, Moon said this morning that everyone has a story, and you know, history is sort of the collective mushing together of all the stories. When we ask people in those early days, especially African American students, whether the faculty was in some way in your corner, people have different memories. You, in the autumn of 72 or 72, you are the starting running back, the one black football player on an all-white team, and it comes time to play St. Aug.
Yes.
And there is a pep rally
Yes.
in the chapel upstairs at,
Here.
at Jesuit
In
High
this
School.
room.
In this room?
This room.
Tell the story.
Okay. Junior year is a pretty good team. I'd been brought up as a sophomore from the JV. I was the captain of the JV. And because I wanted to go JV, I didn't try it for the varsity because I didn't like the guys on the varsity. I didn't think they liked me. They had said some things to me along the way, you know, nothing really awful, but you know, when I got moved up to the varsity and you know, I remember they had been invited to we had a decent team sophomore year. They'd been invited to play in something afterward, a post-season game, and they were going to vote on it, and I went to raise my vote. A lot of them looked at me and said, "You're not allowed to vote, don't you know that?" So junior year comes, and it's the St. Aug game. And I believe, my recollection is that we're both undefeated in district. We may not have been undefeated, but we're both undefeated in district. It's early in the season, and it's the St. Aug game, and there's always a pep rally, and they let the school out, and they encouraged everybody to come here. And the seniors were sitting here, and the juniors were behind, so I was right over there. I remember I was sitting right over there near where Dr. DeGrange is sitting, where Drake is. Maybe in that seat, close. Could be, it was close. And they always poke fun at the other school. Well, De La Salle was the Sallies, and Holy Cross, they'd come out with the kitty cats, and you know what they call them, and they'd come out. And whoever else, so they always poke fun. But this was the St. Aug game. So the seniors had organized this pep rally. I had no idea what was coming, and I was sitting over there. And then they started to play the fight song for St. Aug. Well, I knew St. Aug didn't have a fight song. So they played theme from Shaft. And that was around the time Soul Train had come out. You know, waka, 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 boom, for those of you who know, theme from Shaft. And out they come in Afro wigs and shoe polish, blackface. And the place erupts, and they start doing the Soul Train dance, as only white guys can do. So it was doubly disgusting. And I didn't know what to say, and I felt very much alone. I remember sitting there, I remember looking down, I think Robert Ward was sitting there, and he was kind of sitting there with his mouth open. And I couldn't see anybody else, I couldn't hear anybody else. One of the football coaches was standing, leaning against the wall right next to me, right by the fire alarm there, laughing and guffawing. It was just I used the word like a cacophony in my head, because I didn't know what to do. I said, look at this. And I thought to myself, I'm in the wrong place, I'm on the wrong team. I'm playing for the wrong school. And I had waited for this moment. I lived across the street from St. Aug. I wanted to beat St. Aug worse than I wanted to beat the guy that robbed my mama's purse. I had from the second, because they had called, I was an Oreo, like I said, I was an Oreo in the neighborhood, and I was over here, and I'm playing, and I've been waiting, this is my moment in the sun. And this is what happened. Oh boy, so what do? I'm 16, I guess. 16 or 17. I'm a kid. So what do? So it's over, mercifully. I didn't run up to the microphone. I thought about that and grabbing the mic, throwing it out, throwing it down. So that's going to get me expelled. You know, they're going to think I'm crazy. And so when they played the alma mater at the end, you know, mother alma mater, I refused to stand up. I wouldn't stand. And I just stayed in my seat. And I got some words for that. And later on, there was a bus ride going to practice. One of the seniors got up and spoke, because seniors could do that, and said, well, I know there's one on the bus, but I'm going to say this anyway. One, there's two everything on the bus, you know. At least there's two quarterbacks, two tackling, but there's only one me. So who's he talking to? And he says, this is more than a football game. This is about our race, our heritage, our school, our race, and our heritage, whichever order he said. I remember those two. That's what I remember. Some people may dispute it. I know somebody, he was on that bus with me, I think, probably. Is that right? You remember that? Okay. So there's independent confirmation that this did happen. I didn't imagine this. And I got up and I said, well, I hope they break your neck. I said it a little more colorfully than that. Mr. Grise, an English professor, there were some adjectives there that, you know, a Christian man shouldn't say. And we charged each other. We couldn't get to each other because we were at the opposite ends of the bus. I was in the back. I liked it in the back. I like to lay on the tackling dummies. So they pulled me out the back of the bus and calmed me down, and Coach John Arms came over, big man, Marine, and he put his arm on me. He said, what's going on? What's going on? You know, and, you know, testosterone and everything is rushing, and I'm angry, and I'm just angry. I'm angry, and I'm so angry I'm almost in tears. I'm that angry. I'm emotional anyway. And he says, what's going on? I said, Coach, I can't play. And the game is the next night. We're in shorts and T-shirts. We're in pads and shorts. And the game is the next night. And I don't want to play. I said, what do you mean you don't want to play? I said, I can't play. I said, why can't you play? I said, because I hope St. Aug wins. I want St. Aug to beat us. And he said, I can understand. I said, so I can't play. He said, put his arm on my shoulder pad. He said, well, let me ask you this. Do you think you could play in the game, not do anything to make us lose, but hope they win? I went, huh? I said, you asked, he said, basically, just don't throw the game. But it's okay if they win. I said, Coach, just understand, I mean, I feel like I'm on the wrong team. And he said, I understand. I want you to play in the game. I said, well, if you promise me you're not going to do anything to lose the game. I said, I promise you I will not do anything to lose the game. He said, then you start tomorrow night. And I had a decent game. We lost 17-3. I think St. Aug scored on the first play of the game and the last play of the game. And the rest of the time, you know, it was an even situation. And St. Aug won, and I was okay with that. And I've never told my teammates that, Bert. I never said it, but I was cool with it, just because of the way it went down. And the night of the pep rally, this is important, the night of the pep rally when they came out like that, no one came to you said the support. One man called me at home. I got one call from one faculty member at home. I was sitting there, and John Sirio, who was my homeroom teacher, 8th grade, called my house and apologized. And he's the only one. And he was it. And he said, I'm sorry. And he was sensitive. And I remember him saying he was a Republican. And I said, well, you know, politically, I said, well, I didn't know any Republicans. I never knew nice people could be Republicans. Because I knew Republicans hated black people. I knew this. Just like black people had tails, I figured Republicans had horns, and they were evil people. But he was not. But he saved me that night because I really was in a place where I didn't know what was going on. I felt very much alone. There were 4 of us in my class of 163. I was the only athlete. The other guys didn't do. Marlon's class of 1 year ahead of me didn't have many. He and Blaine, that was it, I think. So it was a long journey that day. But since that time, but the next year, they ended up asking me to go and recruit for Jesuit. So next year, I did the pep rally for St. Aug. I was a senior. I said, I'm giving the pep rally this year, brother. And I stood up on the podium and with Mickey Hubble, and I gave the speech. And it was, you know, so.
So we're going to wrap this up. I'm going to ask these guys, I'm going to ask the alums, or the African American alums. One quick question. Every one of you all has talked about not having a smooth ride here in various particulars. But you flew 2,000 miles to come back here. You're the alumnus of the year in 2012. You flew here just for this event. Why?
Because I needed to. I wanted to and I needed to, and I was honored to be asked to do it. I thought it was forgotten, really. I'd never written it down. When Matt sent that to me, I said, you know, I've never told this story. I've told it, but I've never put it out there for the world to see, warts and all. And I said, you know, that's just a part of it. That's just one day and one incident. But there were so many other good ones. I can't get lost in the, it's like getting a lawsuit. You know, I'm a doctor. You know, it's like, you know, somebody sues you, and that's the one you remember. You forget the 999 good cases that you did. You remember the one bad one. And I don't want to give the impression that 999 days were bad because I had one bad one. The other 999 days were pretty good. That was a bad one. The rest of the experience was wonderful. Jesuit prepared me to deal with a lot of different things, and I still use it to this day. So it was an honor for me to be asked to come. So when somebody presents you with an honorable task, it would be ungentlemanly
Oh.
to not accept.
Mark.
You know, a couple of things. You know, I wrote a letter to Father Fitzgerald, your predecessor, Father McGinn, about 4 years ago, pointed out to him that 2013 or 14 would be the 50th anniversary of the integration of Jesuit High School, and encouraged him to somehow reflect it. He got a polite response from Father McGinn and said he would think about it and that he was transitioning. So I do want to thank Matt Grau and Father Fitzgerald and Pierre and Bruce, everyone who has noted this very important date. And it's a bigger story than Jesuit High School. It's a story of the Archdiocese, Catholicism, New Orleans, race and integration. Jesuit is a part of a much, much bigger story. Were there tough times and feelings of alienation when we were here? No doubt. I pride myself on being able to confront any adversity that life may throw my way. Jesuit, and I have to say Christian brothers, prepared me for everything and anything. Made me fearless, made me feel comfortable in the work I do. I'm dealing with so many different types of people. You know, princes and paupers, people who agree with me and people who vehemently disagree with me. And I feel that my experience here prepared me for that. I have no rose-colored shades on, no sense of superiority or inferiority in dealing with any people. That's the preparation. I'm here because I'm proud to be a part of this community. This is the best high school in this state. It is. And bar none, and you know, Stephen and Dooky and I, you know, we were rebels. We were all probably preordained to go to St. Augustine. And we escaped that and came over here. So, you know, it's a great sense of, a great positive feeling, even though there was adversity and challenge, because what it teaches you is that life is of adversity and challenge. Pity the child who gets to be 25, 30, 35 years of age, and for the first time in their life, they feel rejected or disrespected. They don't know how to confront it or how to deal with it. So those times were preparatory, they were seasoning, they were toughening, they were hardening. I got a good education here. I didn't take Latin, but I know words of Latin, so I can impress presidents and, you know, say, where'd you learn those words in Latin? I mean, that's my Jesuit education, right? And so I love the Jesuits so much, right, that I ended up at a second Jesuit school. I went to Georgetown University Law School. So in the annals, when I got to New York, it was very interesting. The community there at Fordham and St. Regis High School figured out I had attended Jesuit, St. Peter's Prep in Jersey City, another Jesuit school. They all invited me to come out and talk to them because I was part of this Jesuit community. So yeah, adversity, some tough times, some pain, but I think we're here because this is a coming full circle for so many of us back to this place. And so, you know, I love Jesuit. I'm a proud Blue Jay.
Dooky?
Well, I love Jesuit as well, and felt the same that my colleagues here expressed, a sense of oneness to be a Blue Jay, a sense of identity with the school and with the men who graduated with the school. And I see still in this New Orleans community a lot of leaders that have graduated from Jesuit. I feel one with them, and it makes me feel one with New Orleans in the future. But I also like Jesuit because the faculty members taught us how to think for ourselves, how to make right choices in life, and how to adapt to changing situations, and gave us the confidence that we would still survive and excel. So that's why I really am proud to be a Blue Jay.
All right.
And let's thank Mayor Landrieu for a lifetime of courage.
Yes.
Courage, just plain old courage. And, you know, it's rubbed off on his kids, and that's a beautiful thing, and we celebrate that too.
Thank you very much.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much.